Hello, and welcome to this special edition of the Capital Report. We're in Seoul, South Korea. We'll be filming here for the next few days, where we'll be taking a deeper look at the Chinese Communist Party's influence and infiltration into this democratic nation. South Korea is not just strategically important to countering North Korea's nuclear proliferation, but this country serves as a beacon of light for democratic values and human rights for billions of people in this region. Being surrounded by communist China just to the west and sharing a border with communist North Korea only 35 miles from where we stand right here, the democratic values and way of life South Korea enjoys is facing an imminent challenge. This as CCP infiltration permeates every sector of this society. Behind me is one of several major theaters throughout South Korea, who at the Chinese Communist Party's behest has blocked an American dance troupe from performing. This will be the focus of tonight's episode. What is Shen Yun, and why is the Chinese Communist Party working against it in South Korea? NTD dives into the history of the CCP's interference with Shen Yun and why the free world should care.
The long arm of Chinese censorship reaching a key U.S. ally, South Korea. Major theaters in Seoul now declining to rent their venues to Shen Yun, an American performing arts company whose dance and music portrayed China before communism. Epoch Times investigations show that a Chinese embassy in Korea has for years been threatening Korean theaters with economic and political retaliation if they let Shen Yun perform. In 2016, KBS Hall, owned by Korea's national broadcaster, canceled a contract with Shen Yun after the Chinese embassy sent them a letter warning it will be detrimental to the relationship between Korea and China if the theater proceeded with Shen Yun performances. A Korean court ruling in this case explicitly pointed to potential economic retaliation from Beijing, stating that if KBS cannot export its broadcasting contents to China, it may face huge losses. But Korea is not the only democratic country in which the CCP is using its political and economic leverage to censor free art. Chinese embassies have sent similar letters trying to stop Shen Yun from performing to theaters and elected officials in the US, Canada, Europe, and Australia. In one case in Spain, the Chinese ambassador there admitted on tape that he personally warned a Madrid theater that they would lose the Chinese market if they didn't cancel Shen Yun.
跟中国的这个市场今后合作的前景是非常广阔的。你不能因为这个东西呢就丢掉了这个中国市场。他们也是马上就是认识到这个问题。
But why would a powerful regime use all kinds of tactics to interfere with a classical Chinese dance show? Shen Yun describes its mission as to revive China's 5 millennia-old traditional culture, which has been largely destroyed under decades of communist rule. The group's performers also practice Falun Gong, a meditation practice whose practitioners are persecuted by the Chinese regime. Some company members have fled religious persecution themselves or have family members still imprisoned in China. Alongside dances portraying scenes from imperial dynasties and literary classics, some of the show's pieces also depict the story of what Falun Gong practitioners are facing in China today, or attacks on Buddhist temples during the Cultural Revolution. The show's perspectives on Chinese culture, history, and spirituality have put it on the CCP's target list. But it's also these values that have drawn millions of audience members from around the world. Shen Yun now tours in nearly 200 cities and 20 countries every year. While the CCP's campaigns to censor the show have failed in most countries, they are making headway in Korea. How Korea and the US act on it could decide if China can exert control over more key allies, all at a crossroads, bowing to CCP pressure or upholding values shared by the free world.
So what's driving the Chinese Communist Party to leverage its sabotage campaign against Shen Yun on a foreign land? And why should freedom-loving people from around the world be concerned? We sat down with Mr. Louis An, production director and show coordinator for Shen Yun in South Korea.
Louis An, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Shen Yun faces a lot of adversity from the Chinese Communist Party. We've seen things like disinformation, sabotaging the buses that the Shen Yun performers travel in to the theaters, slashing the tires, a variety of things, even pressuring theaters throughout the world to not invite Shen Yun and not host them. Why are we seeing this type of resistance from the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah, here's some main reason. CCP started the persecution against Falun Gong in China in 1999. CCP is afraid of expose of their persecution in China, and so that's why they try to interfere as much as they can.
Do you have any evidence that the CCP is behind this and some of the actions that they've taken?
Yeah, we have many evidence. CCP uses all kinds of methods to interfere with the Shen Yun performance in South Korea. And then one of the examples is they send official letter to the theater or city government to pressure them to cancel the show or cancel the contract.
And so pressure is one thing, but following through on that pressure is another. Can you tell us about the instances where the Korean theater in Korea has canceled a Shen Yun performance?
There are so many cases canceling show in South Korea, and one of the standout is the KBS case in 2016. We had almost sold out show. They sent us notice to cancel the venue rental contract. And then we take that appeal to the court, and then the court cited our appeal. After that, KBS submit their appeal again with the official letter from the Chinese embassy. So we can, that's on evidence. And earlier this year, there was a media report about this issue. They had an interview with a Chinese embassy person, and then they clearly mentioned to the reporter that they're going to intervene with activities for Falun Dafa and Shen Yun.
So it's obviously clear that the CCP is openly and blatantly interfering with this performance. KBS Theater, as you mentioned, the Korean broadcasting station. But at the same time, over the years, Shen Yun has been able to successfully perform sometimes in Korea for a Korean audience. What has the reaction been after a Shen Yun performance by the Korean people?
Yeah, they love to see the show, and some inspired audience shed tears too, and also they all say it's very beautiful, so beautiful. So I think the Korean people share the same traditional culture, so they were accepted in Korea.
So why do you think the Korean people should watch Shen Yun?
Nowadays, in around the world, the moral is declining. So, and also, the school doesn't teach enough so the moral things. Shen Yun Performing Arts contains all these contents in their programs.
If the Korean people find out what's actually happening, where China, like you said, a third-party country, is influencing on a very deep level their country, how are they going to feel about this?
Korean people has gone through many different difficulties in the past, like a Korean War. There is an invasion from Japan. So people has to know the truth, what is going on there. Government has to direct the people on the right way, and the government also has to protect their rights.
Louis An, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back to the Capital Report. I'm Steve Lance reporting from Seoul, South Korea. So what can be done to protect South Korea's cultural and artistic freedom? And what do the people of Korea think about the Chinese Communist Party's influence in their country? To learn about these issues, I sat down with Greg Scarlatow. He's the executive director of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. He also works with the United States State Department and has lived in South Korea for many years. Greg Scarlatow, thank you so much for joining us.
The pleasure's all mine.
Greg, Shen Yun Performing Arts, an American arts troupe, it's faced a lot of barriers actually performing in South Korea due to the CCP's interference. What do you make, or are you surprised by China's influence over this sovereign nation?
I'm not surprised by China's influence. This is a common Chinese practice of trying to capitalize on commercial, trade, investment ties to place pressure, tremendous amounts of pressure on countries such as South Korea. Now, Shen Yun had many performances here in the United States, the Kennedy Center, the Lincoln Center, no problem whatsoever. South Korea is a staunch friend, ally, and partner of the United States, and South Korea is a democratic country. So this is a rather blunt, blatant, rude, I would say, undiplomatic at the very least, interference with the fundamental rights and freedoms embedded in the very Korean constitution. Why? Because China has the leverage, or it thinks it has the leverage. China is South Korea's largest export partner, South Korea's largest import partner, South Korea's largest trading partner, and of course, South Korea is China's third largest trading partner. Let us not even talk about South Korean investment in China.
There seems to be a bit of a disconnect. There's many polls that come out of South Korea that show very low favorability among the Korean people toward China. So with that said, and that's mainly due to China's ties with North Korea, or a big part of it anyway, two communist nations. How do such instances of interference that you just mentioned with the Shen Yun Performing Arts get overlooked?
If they find out about this, South Koreans will not be happy to hear about Chinese interference with the right embedded in Article 22 of the South Korean Constitution, the right to perform, the right to engage in free expression, and the right to access artistic performances. South Koreans are fundamentally upset with the fact that China protects and supports the North Korean regime of Kim Jong-un that's starving its own people, oppressing its own people, crushing their fundamental human rights, exploiting and oppressing its own people at home and abroad in order to procure the resources it needs, the hard currency it needs in order to develop its nuclear and ballistic missile program. These are programs that threaten the lives of the 53 million South Koreans living in the South. Of course, South Koreans are upset with this.
Greg, how can South Korea maintain its cultural and artistic freedoms while also ensuring national and economic security amidst deep economic ties with China?
We need issues, and this is clearly an issue. We need to reach out to diplomatic missions in South Korea. We need to reach out to relevant UN agencies. We need to reach out to embassies at critical locations. By the way, the U.S. State Department issues a human rights report every spring. In its human rights report on South Korea, the United States Department of State did mention this issue of performances stifled through Chinese intervention and discrimination by China, and worse, much worse, against Falun Gong in its own report on human rights in South Korea. So this is already an issue that is known.
Greg Scarlatow, thank you so much for joining us.
The pleasure's all mine. And best of luck to all of us. We fight for rights. We fight tyranny. We got them surrounded.
Thank you, Greg. The Chinese Communist Party exerts influence over Korea through a variety of tactics. What are they specifically? And why are these tactics still working despite the majority of Korean people holding an unfavorable view of the CCP? NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao sat down with Dr. Tara Oh, an adjunct fellow at the Hudson Institute. Dr. Oh has done extensive research on South Korea's political and economic systems. She's also worked at the Pentagon.
Dr. Taro, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me here.
So we in the U.S., we consider South Korea as a very important democratic ally of the U.S. But based on your in-depth research, you found that the Chinese Communist Party actually has been conducting various kinds of influence operations in Korea, trying to influence its arts, media, culture, if not even the government. So tell us more about that. What specific tactics have you seen and how is it done?
When we think about Korea, we normally think, oh, it's an ally of the United States. It has top economy in the world. And so we don't usually worry about South Korea. We normally look at North Korean threat, North Korean missiles. But what we have not looked at deeply is the subversion by the Chinese Communist Party in Korea. And it's not really well spread, it's not well known, but it is extensive and it is rather deep. So CCP has United Front Department, as is well known, and it tries to subvert the government and the countries in which it operates. And it, of course, has operations in South Korea as well. What I understand is that regarding Shen Yun, first of all, it's another cultural warfare, as I mentioned, but in this case, it's blocking the culture so that it cannot be seen by South Koreans. Of course, it applies pressure. It applies the traditional tactics. It could be blackmail, it could be money, it could be some scandal. So they have various methods of doing this.
That's very interesting. And you mentioned the fact that the CCP is trying to block Koreans, like the Korean ordinary people, from seeing Shen Yun, which is, trying to first present authentic Chinese culture, but also try to, tell people about what is China like before communism. So why do you think the Chinese government is so afraid of Korean people seeing that?
I think China wants to promote itself, CCP, as the legitimate authority over entire China. And if you show older culture, pre-CCP culture, then it shows that China it's possible to run China by some other than CCP. And I think that's their concern. They want to make sure that the entire world views China that is run by CCP and CCP only.
Why do you think such, things affected by the CCP are still taking place in Korea? Let it be the statue or now Shen Yun being blocked. What do you think gives them the opportunity to still do this under a pro-US Korean government?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Of course, the administration changed from the previous president was Moon Jae-in, who was in power from 2017 to May 2022. Now, with the new administration, the change in the relations or the way the alliance relations is viewed has changed dramatically. The last administration, they were sort of distanced from the public when it comes to showing support for the alliance.
But what should the Korean government do now, facing, of course, continuous pressure from the CCP on the one hand, but now also, having to face the reality that the world is not agreeing with their tactics?
So what happened when former President Moon Jae-in left the office? Right before he left the office, he placed thousands of people who support his ideology into various government offices. And South Korean government is rather large. It has not only the ministries and different agencies, but it also has some of the entities that are quasi-public. And so in many of these places, Moon placed his people there. And so they continue the old policy. So what the new government needs to do is identify them and replace them with people that will support the current administration's policies, which is, he mentioned freedom multiple times. So people who would support his policies that defend freedom for South Korea.
Dr. Taro, thanks so much for the great insights from inside Korea and also about Korea's position in the world. Thank you so much.
This concludes part one of our special programming from Seoul, South Korea. We'll have more for you tomorrow, so please stay tuned. I'm Steve Lance. Thank you for watching, and have a nice evening.